What kind of man takes a janitor job just to keep his daughter fed and ends up saving a billionaire's broken family without even trying? They said no maid lasted longer than 12 hours in the Callahan mansion. But then came a quiet single dad. And by nightfall, one of the billionaire's kids had laughed for the first time in years. If stories of healing, unexpected kindness, and second chances move you, we invite you to subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep telling the kind of stories that stay in your heart, long after the screen fades to black. Now, let us begin. At exactly 11:42 a.m., the front door of the Callahan estate slammed shut so hard the chandeliers trembled. A woman in a wrinkled uniform and tear-streaked face rushed past the marble lion statues, heels clacking over the cobblestone like a warning bell. Her name was Teresa, the 17th maid in 4 months. She didn't even wait for her paycheck. She just muttered, "I can't do this. Not with them," and disappeared into her car, tires screeching away. Behind the glass windows, 3 children stood perfectly still, like carved ice. No crying, no waving goodbye, just staring. No one chased after her. No one ever did. Inside the house, silence fell like a heavy curtain. The youngest child, 5-year-old Ivy, tilted her head to the side and whispered something only her siblings could hear. Her twin brother, Isaac, didn't blink. Neither did Lily, the eldest at 9. They simply turned and walked away from the foyer, back into their fortress of chairs, pillows, and rulebooks, a world where adults were the enemy and kindness was just camouflage. Across town, at the security gate of the Callahan estate, Harrison Wade sat in the faded driver's seat of a second-hand Ford truck. A thick manila envelope rested on his lap, one corner chewed slightly by his daughter's nervous fidgeting. He didn't mind. He understood that kind of silence. Next to him in the passenger seat sat Emily, age 6, arms folded around a worn, stuffed rabbit. She hadn't spoken a word in 6 months, not since her mother's accident, not since Harrison had returned from deployment to find the world he'd tried to protect gone. The Marine Corps had taught him how to survive war zones, but it hadn't prepared him for playground politics, school meetings, or little girls who stopped talking and cried only in their sleep. Still, Harrison showed up, every day. Even now, no rank, no plan, and no backup, he showed up. His military uniform had been replaced with jeans, a faded flannel, and scuffed boots. A janitor's apron was folded neatly behind him. The only thing he carried from his old life was the posture. Straight spine. Eyes scanning, heart guarded. He pressed the intercom. "Name's Harrison Wade, here for the custodial position." There was a long pause. Then a voice crackled back, female, clipped, and cold. "Drive to the roundabout. Park near the east entrance." The gate buzzed open. The Callahan estate didn't just scream wealth, it whispered it, in curated trees and imported marble fountains. But Harrison wasn't impressed. He was a man who'd once slept on concrete under enemy fire. Luxury meant nothing without peace. He parked the truck. Emily's small fingers clutched his sleeve as he stepped out. "I'll only be a minute," he murmured, brushing a hand over her hair. "Just gonna talk to the lady, then we'll see." She didn't nod, just watched him go with those large, unreadable eyes that seemed too old for her age. At the door, he was met by Lyra Callahan, the woman behind half the tech empire's acquisitions in the last 5 years. She was power-dressed in ash gray, high heels, clicking like punctuation marks, platinum hair pulled into a sleek twist that did nothing to soften her stare. "You've got 24 hours, Mr. Wade," she said without greeting. "Not a second more." "Understood," he said. "You mop. You clean. You do not talk to the children unless they speak first." He didn't argue. She glanced over his shoulder, noticing the small head barely visible through the truck window. "She stays in the truck. For now." Lyra's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted. Almost softened. Almost. Then it was gone. "This way." Harrison followed her into a house that felt more like a museum than a home. Every surface gleamed. Every flower was symmetrical. But the air was wrong. Too still. Too sterile. Like everyone was trying too hard to pretend nothing was broken. 3 children. No pets. No allergies, she said briskly. But they don't like noise. Or people. Noted? She didn't explain further. He was led to the central living room, sunlight pouring through cathedral windows, cascading over a fortress of chairs, blankets, and folded warning signs taped to the couch. No adults beyond this point. Violators will be glared at. Lyra hesitated just long enough to glance toward the blockade. Good luck, she said, then disappeared. Harrison stood alone, holding a mop and a job he wasn't sure he wanted. Then, from behind the fortress, 3 sets of eyes rose slowly above the barricade, silent, suspicious, watching. The twins had matching blonde curls and ice-blue stares. Lily, the eldest, had a clipboard and a stopwatch. She clicked it. You've got exactly 12 hours, she said flatly. Like the others. The boy folded his arms. The youngest girl, tiny Ivy, didn't say a word. She just pushed a button on a toy that played dramatic violin music and scowled. Harrison didn't flinch. He placed the mop against the wall, removed his jacket, and started sweeping. Quietly, carefully. Not into their space, but around it. They watched him, waiting for the moment he'd break a rule. He didn't. Not even when Ivy hurled a juice box toward his foot. It landed with a splat. Harrison bent down, wiped it up with a cloth, and said nothing. He didn't leave. He didn't yell. He just stayed. At 12:03 p.m., Ivy whispered, "He's weird." Lily wrote it down. Isaac blinked. Emily, still in the truck, rested her chin on the dashboard, watching through the window, the only one who truly noticed something shift in the air. Something small. Something hopeful. At precisely 7:03 a.m. the next morning, a secret council convened behind a fortress of throw pillows and couch cushions. Max, age 9, tapped a pencil against a clipboard, his brows furrowed like a general preparing for battle. Ava, age 7, clutched a pair of walkie-talkies with pink glitter tape wrapped around the antennas, and Dylan, 5, sat cross-legged with a gummy bear in his mouth and a glint of chaos in his eyes. They were not ordinary siblings. They were the infamous Callahan trio, and this was Operation Scare the Janitor. He survived the juice box test, Max said grimly, flipping a page. And the silent stare challenge. Ava nodded. Didn't even flinch when Ivy banged the cabinet doors for 6 minutes straight. Dylan pointed at the camera taped to the back of an old RC truck. Can I drive this under his feet again? Not yet, Max whispered. Today. We escalate. He held up a list written in blue crayon. Bucket over doorway. Ketchup blanket trap. Unexpected lullaby. Marshmallow mines in hallway. Operation Destroy, Maid 118 is go. Across the hallway, unaware, or pretending to be, Harrison Wade knelt in the kitchen, scrubbing a stubborn spot on the floor with the kind of patience only a man who'd once defused bombs could maintain. Outside the window, the morning sun caught in his silvering hair. The mop leaned against the wall like a tired soldier, and in his pocket sat a granola bar he was saving for Emily. It had been a quiet night. Emily had slept in the truck. He'd checked on her twice, her rabbit tucked in. Still no words. But she'd rested her hand on his wrist before falling asleep. That meant something. Now he whistled a soft tune, half lullaby, half something he couldn't quite place. That's when the trap sprung. A splash. Cold water dumped directly onto his head as he passed through the back hallway arch. Max fist-pumped from behind the plant stand. Ava ducked behind the curtain, biting her lip. Dylan froze, half giggle, half gasp. Harrison blinked. Water dripped from his hair. He looked up slowly at the tilted mop bucket now swinging gently from a string tied to the air vent. Well, he said aloud, brushing water from his face. Looks like I just walked into the Amazon monsoon. He didn't yell, didn't scowl. He simply bowed slightly at the waist like a performer, dripping wet, and said, "Bravo." Then, he slipped, or rather, pretended to. He spun dramatically, landed with a thud on the rug, and groaned like a cartoon pirate. Max's eyes widened. "He's actin'," Ava whispered. I am slain, Harrison cried out, holding his chest. Oh, cruel, slippery fate. From behind the wall, a stifled giggle escaped. It came from Dylan. It was small, barely audible, but real. A chuckle. A first. Harrison didn't look toward the sound. He just lay there, dramatically sprawled, then slowly reached for his mop like it was a sword. He stood, spun it, pointed the tip at the living room fort. I know you're in there, he said, lowering his voice to a rich baritone. And I know you have marshmallows. I can smell them. Max peeked out. You're not mad? Mad? You think a mop ambush is new to me? Harrison raised an eyebrow. I once got duct taped to a toilet seat by an entire platoon of Marines on my birthday. Ava gasped. No way! Way! He twirled the mop like a Jedi lightsaber. Dylan peeked out now, eyes round. Harrison took a step forward and suddenly froze, stiffening. What's happening? He stammered in a fake, dramatic voice. Oh no, I'm being controlled. He dropped to his knees and slumped like a puppet. The trio exchanged looks. He's pretending we trapped him, Ava whispered. This is reverse psychology, Max replied cautiously. No, Dylan said softly. It's funny. Harrison tilted his head back slowly and whispered, I surrender. To the Marshmallow Kingdom. Then he let out a very serious snore. For 3 seconds, the kids didn't move. Then Ava burst into laughter. Not a smirk, not a polite giggle. A real laugh. Max bit his lip, holding it in. But he couldn't. He joined in. And Dylan? He dropped the gummy bear, clapped both hands over his mouth, and laughed. High-pitched, bright, free. It filled the living room like music no one remembered missing until it returned. From her office upstairs, Lyra Callahan stared at the security monitor on her tablet. She had reviewed dozens of resumes, fired countless staff, hired behavior experts, psychologists, even a meditation coach from Sweden. Nothing had worked. Her children had turned grief into a fortress, and she hadn't known how to tear it down. Until now. On the screen, she watched as Harrison bowed to the children, picked up the ketchup-smeared blanket without comment, and offered Ava a tissue for her runny nose. None of it was part of his job description. But he did it anyway. Still, Lyra didn't smile, didn't react. She simply lowered the tablet, sipped her black coffee, and stared out the window at the white clouds above the hills. Below, in the hallway, Harrison was still sprawled on the rug, now humming a victory theme, while the 3 kids circled him, peppering him with questions. Were you really in the Marines? Did you ever meet a tiger? Can you teach us how to make booby traps? He sat up slowly. Only if you promise not to use them on me. Max crossed his heart. Ava nodded solemnly. Dylan held out a marshmallow like a peace offering. Harrison took it, smiled, and whispered, Mission failed, but you made me laugh. Emily, still inside the truck outside, pressed her forehead gently to the window. She didn't understand everything, but she knew what joy sounded like, and for the first time in months, she wanted to go inside. Lyra Callahan stood in the hallway outside the guest quarters, arms folded over her tailored blazer. Her heels clicked once on the marble as she watched Harrison Wade fold up his cleaning cloth with military precision. Mr. Wade, she said, coolly. He turned, nodding with respectful detachment. From this moment forward, she continued, voice even and practiced. You are not to interact with my children unless absolutely necessary. Harrison said nothing. No speaking, no teaching, no correcting. You're here to clean, that's all. A long pause. He nodded once, firmly. Understood. She reached into her blazer and extended a thin envelope. Inside, $200 in cash, 1 day's trial rate. He didn't count it, just bowed his head. Lyra watched him for a second longer. Her gaze, sharp as frost, flicked toward the staircase behind him, where small footsteps had just vanished. Then she turned and walked away. The silence in the mansion deepened again. By mid-morning, Harrison was wiping down the glass panels in the west corridor, careful to make no sound beyond the rhythmic squeak of cloth on surface. A half-empty bucket sat by his knee. No humming today. No imaginary mop sword. Just work. Rules were rules, and he'd learned to follow them when the cost of breaking them could be far greater than a job. He moved room by room, keeping quiet, keeping small, until he reached Dylan's bedroom. It was the smallest of the three. A rocket ship mobile hung from the ceiling. Stuffed animals lined the bed, arranged with a kind of anxious neatness that felt deliberate, like someone trying hard to get it right. The floor was scattered with crayons, papers, a few books without covers. Harrison knelt to gather the drawings. That's when he saw it. A wrinkled sheet of printer paper, shoved half under the rug. Crayon strokes, messy but intense, revealed 3 jagged balloons, an angry sun, and a stick figure with X's for eyes. Scrawled across the bottom, "I hate birthdays." Harrison held the paper in one calloused hand. No context, no explanation. Just emotion. Raw. Loud, even if written by a silent hand. He carefully folded it and tucked it back where he found it, then continued sweeping. Outside, the sun crept higher. In the back garden, Emily sat alone near the hedge, her sketchbook on her lap, legs tucked beneath her. She hadn't drawn since her mother passed, not until yesterday, after seeing the kids laugh. Today, her pencil moved slowly across the page again. She didn't notice the small figure that appeared behind her until a shadow fell across the paper. Dylan. He didn't say a word, just looked. Emily didn't flinch, didn't look up. She slid her sketchbook slightly toward him, a blank page. Dylan hesitated, then sat down beside her, knees barely brushing. He pulled a crayon from his pocket, green, dull from use, and began drawing. A tree, lopsided. No leaves. Emily added a sun, just a circle. No rays. They didn't speak, they didn't smile. But side by side they kept drawing, and something quiet and sacred passed between them. 2 kids, both voiceless, both heard. Inside, Harrison cleaned the staircase banister with a toothbrush. An old habit. Small details mattered. As he crouched to get the inner grooves, a shadow moved on the landing above. Ava. She stood holding a doll with no arms, her eyes locked on him. Hard. Curious. He gave her a nod. Didn't speak, didn't smile. And that made her pause. The other maids had always tried to win them over. With candy. With cartoons. With forced cheer. But this one, this janitor, didn't push. He just worked. She watched him another second, then disappeared down the hall. Harrison exhaled slowly and returned to scrubbing. By dusk, the mansion glowed amber through the tall windows. Harrison finished mopping the art room, half museum, half chaos, and washed his hands at the butler's sink. He wiped his palms dry, pulled out the granola bar, and walked outside to the pickup truck, where Emily sat, curled in the front seat, still holding her sketchbook. He tapped the glass gently. She opened the door. "You hungry, Bug?" he asked. She took the bar. Nodded. He brushed a leaf from her hair. "Good day?" She didn't answer. Didn't need to. He saw it in the sketchbook on her lap. He leaned in. There were 4 figures now, 3 children, and him, standing at the center, smiling, arms out, like he was holding them all. Harrison's breath caught. It wasn't drawn perfectly. The lines were uneven, but the message was clear. She had seen it, seen him, and she believed in something that hadn't happened yet, but maybe could. Upstairs, Lyra sat at her desk, staring at the security footage again. She had watched the garden scene 5 times. The girl and Dylan, sitting together, drawing. No words exchanged, but somehow it was the most conversation either had had in months. She leaned back in her chair, fingers laced beneath her chin. Still no reaction, still no smile. But her hand, resting on her keyboard, curled slightly. Almost softly. Almost like something was breaking open. Almost. The storm outside wasn't rain or wind. It was silence. Another nanny had packed up and left. This one hadn't even lasted till sundown. Her departure was wordless, just the sound of her shoes echoing down the hallway. By 6:40 p.m., the Callahan house had lost its 18th caregiver. Lyra didn't blink. She simply reached for her phone, tapped once, and called accounting. "Double his rate for the night," she said. "If he stays." Harrison stood in the mudroom, still in his janitor uniform, mop leaning against his shoulder like a weary rifle. He looked down at the envelope she handed him, twice the amount from the day before. "For what?" he asked, voice low. "Nanny quit," Lyra said. "Stay tonight. Clean what needs cleaning. Just don't talk to the kids." He nodded, slow and careful. Understood. But in his chest, something cracked. Just a job, just floors, just a paycheck. Right? By 8:12 p.m., the halls were quiet. The mansion's lights dimmed low, casting golden slants across marble and wood. In the corner of the family room, Harrison mopped. 3 shadows hovered nearby, not quite hiding, not quite watching. Max sat at the base of the staircase, arms folded. Ava crouched behind the sofa. Dylan lay flat on the rug, chin on his hands, eyes blank. Harrison didn't speak. He didn't look at them. But his voice, calm and worn like an old record, rose as the mop glided across the floor. "You know," he said casually, "some folks say there's a castle buried underneath this house, hidden below the stone and roots. They say it only appears for those who believe in broken magic." The mop turned. He kept going. "Inside that castle lives a lion with no teeth, who protects dreams instead of gold. But every night, the castle shrinks a little. Unless someone laughs before midnight." A creak behind the sofa, a quiet shuffle. But still, he didn't look. He just kept mopping, kept spinning the tale. Now the lion's best friend is a girl who never speaks, but whose drawings glow in the dark. She's the only one who knows where the castle's true door is, and she never tells anyone, not even the moon. His voice dropped to a whisper. But one day, someone listens, really listens. From behind the sofa, Ava's hand trembled slightly as she held her mom's old phone. Recording. She wasn't sure why. She just wanted to remember the story. The way his voice dipped and danced. The way it filled the space. Not like noise, but like warmth. She pressed stop before he could finish. Lyra stood outside the doorway, arms folded. She had seen everything on the cameras. She had heard fragments. That was enough. Violation of contract. "Pack your things," she said sharply. Harrison didn't flinch. He didn't defend. He just looked her in the eye, the first time he ever had, and said, "Yes, ma'am." That night, the house was still. Lyra poured herself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and tried to focus on numbers, margins, timelines, expansion plans. But the hallway was too quiet, her mind restless. She rose, walked to Ava's room, paused. From inside, a faint sound. She pushed the door gently. Ava lay curled under her blanket, clutching a phone to her chest, not texting, not watching videos, listening. Harrison's voice crackled from the speaker. "And the girl with the glowing drawings," he whispered, smiled, just once, because for the first time, someone stayed. Downstairs, Emily lay curled in Harrison's truck, sketchbook on her knees. She hadn't spoken in months, hadn't laughed, but her lips moved. Barely. 3 small words, quiet as a falling feather. "He's funny." The kitchen was too bright for 2:17 a.m. The rest of the Callahan mansion slumbered in silence, but the overhead light in the marble kitchen cast sharp edges on every surface. Stainless steel appliances gleamed like polished armor. The coffee machine hummed low. Harrison stepped in barefoot, t-shirt damp from a midnight mop run, intending to grab water. But he froze. Lyra was already there. She stood by the counter in her silk robe, hair perfectly twisted into a loose bun, holding a cup of coffee so dark it looked like ink. Her eyes met his, clear, sharp, unreadable. Neither of them spoke for a full beat. Then, "Couldn't sleep either?" Harrison asked quietly, his voice still husky from disuse. "I don't sleep," she replied without blinking. "I brief. I close my eyes, regroup, and prepare for the next failure." He raised an eyebrow. "That sounds exhausting." She sipped. "It's efficient." He moved to the sink, filled a glass with water. For a moment, silence returned. But then she said, almost carelessly, "So, what's your take on rich kids?" Harrison didn't look at her, just drank slowly, then said, "You mean your kids, or the ones in general?" Lyra's tone was flat. "Don't play smart." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "All right," he said. "You want honesty? Try me." "Kids are kids," he said. "They don't know wealth. They only know warmth. And they'll trade $1,000 for a 10-minute story from someone who actually sees them." Her face didn't change, but her fingers tensed around the cup. "You think that's all it takes? A little warmth? Some bedtime mop fairy tale and poof, trauma cured?" "No," Harrison said evenly, "but it's a start." She set the cup down hard enough for the porcelain to clink. "You've been here, what, 4 days? And you're already some kind of child psychologist?" "I've been a dad for 11 years, he said. "That earns me something." She didn't back down. "Your daughter doesn't speak." The words landed sharp. He stared at her. "I know," he said quietly. A long pause followed. "You think I'm cold," she said. He shrugged. "You are." Her eyes narrowed. "And you think you're kind?" "No," he said. "I think I'm tired of pretending broken kids are broken because they're too complicated to fix, when the truth is, what? They're not seen. That's it. Not seen. Not heard. Just measured and managed." She looked away. "I manage this house, these kids, a company with 9,000 employees." "Then maybe that's the problem," he cut in. "You manage everything, but you don't feel anything." That stung. Her jaw tightened. "You're out of line." He took a slow breath. "Probably." He started to walk past her, but she said, more softly than before, "What happened to Emily?" He stopped. Back turned, hand on the doorframe. He didn't answer right away. "She used to sing," he said finally. "Couldn't stop her. Every room, every hour. Even when her mom got sick, even in the hospital, she sang." Lyra didn't move. "And then," Harrison said, his voice low, "one day, I brought her to the grocery store. She was 5. I left her sitting in the cart while I checked prices 3 feet away." His breath caught, but he kept going. "A man grabbed her arm, just touched her, said something. I didn't even hear it." He looked down at his hands. "But I snapped, took him down, in front of her. I blacked out." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I remember her face. Not fear. Not tears. Just confusion. And silence. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stopped speaking, and hasn't said a word since." Behind him, Lyra didn't breathe. "She lost her voice," he said, "because I lost control." For the first time, he looked at her, not with anger, not with defense, just truth. "I know what guilt looks like," he said, "and I see it in your eyes every time you look at your kids." The coffee had gone cold in her cup, but Lyra didn't reach for it. She just stood there, bare feet on cold tile, staring at the man in front of her, not as a janitor, not as a trespasser, but as a mirror. And for one unbearable second, she forgot how to breathe. The morning started quietly. No screams, no spilled cereal, no thunderous stomps of rebellion from upstairs. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft shuffle of tiny feet. Harrison was wiping down the kitchen counters when Dylan entered, a sheet of paper gripped tightly in his small hand. His hair stuck up like soft hay, and his pajama pants were too long. But his steps were purposeful. He didn't say a word. Just walked straight to the stainless steel fridge, stood on tiptoe, and, using a single magnetic clip shaped like a smiling sun, pinned the drawing to the door. Then he walked away. Harrison blinked. He turned toward the fridge. The drawing was simple, done in crayon. 4 stick figures stood beneath a curved banner labeled in all caps, "Family." The tallest one had gray hair and held a mop like a sword. To his right were 3 smaller figures, Max, Ava, and Dylan himself. Ava had big curls, Max wore square glasses, and Dylan was holding the mop man's hand. The stick figures were smiling, all of them. Lyra entered the kitchen 5 minutes later, still in a muted charcoal suit, blouse buttoned high. She poured her coffee in silence. Then she saw it. Her expression didn't change. She stared at the fridge for a long moment. Then, without a word, she walked over, peeled the drawing off slowly, folded it once, and placed it in the drawer beside the coffee pods. Harrison didn't say anything. That evening, the house had settled into its usual hush. The children had eaten. Lyra had retreated to her office. Harrison was finishing up the last of the dishes when he noticed something taped back on the fridge. The same drawing. But now, instead of the bright magnetic sun, it was held in place by a small square of clear tape, neatly aligned, pressed flat. Lyra had put it back. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. In the playroom, Emily sat cross-legged beside Dylan. The paper in front of them was larger this time, and for the first time, Emily wasn't using only gray and blue. There were streaks of yellow, soft, pale like sunbeams, and pink, a gentle, hopeful blush. Dylan handed her a crayon and she took it. They didn't speak, but they didn't have to. She drew a window. He drew a sun. She added birds. He added a swing. They were building a world together, one line at a time. Later, when the house dimmed for the night, Harrison checked the hallway cameras to make sure all the kids were in bed. He stopped at the screen showing the girls' room. Ava had already drifted off, tangled in her blanket with a book on her chest, but Emily's bed was empty. He scanned the next screen, the boys' room, and there they were, Emily and Dylan. She had crawled into his bed, and he'd let her. The room was dark, no nightlights, no open door, just the 2 of them, curled under the same blanket, her hand resting gently in his. They had fallen asleep holding hands. No fear. No shadows. Just quiet. Harrison leaned back in the chair, hand resting over his chest, eyes wet without falling. He didn't speak, didn't smile. He just sat there for a long time. In a house that had seen too much silence. Tonight, it finally made sense. The snow had started falling early that afternoon. Soft, slow, like a memory being rewritten in white. It wasn't heavy yet, just enough to dust the trees and coat the long gravel driveway of the Callahan estate in a thin blanket of winter. Inside, laughter echoed for once. Ava had declared it Spy Day, and the mansion had transformed into a fortress of giggles and secrets. Max was in charge of codes. Dylan manned the surveillance cameras, plastic binoculars taped to a coat rack. And Emily, quiet little Emily, had been recruited for the ultimate mission. "Hide where even the grown-ups can't find you," Ava had whispered, eyes dancing with mischief. "And stay there until one of us gives the password." Emily had nodded and vanished. 23 minutes later, something shifted. A chill, not from the weather, but from the absence, from the silence, from the way even Dylan put down his binoculars and asked, "Where's Emily?" They searched the whole west wing, under beds, inside closets, behind the heavy curtains in the music room. Nothing. Then Max noticed the back door, slightly ajar. By the time Lyra arrived from her upstairs conference call, Harrison was already outside, scanning the woods, calling Emily's name with calm but rising urgency. Lyra stormed down the steps, her heels crunching on the icy stone. "Where is she?" Harrison looked at her, breath curling in the cold. "She's not inside." Her voice turned sharp. "You had one job." "I was watching them." "You're not family." Her voice cracked against the trees. "You're a janitor, not family." Harrison didn't answer. He simply took off his coat, handed it to Max, and stepped out into the snow. No gloves, no scarf, just determination and worn boots. and the kind of silence that doesn't argue. It moves. He knew these woods, not because he'd been in them, but because pain had a geography, and grief had its own map. He walked past the frozen rose garden, past the brittle fence where the creek dipped beneath, past where footprints thinned and then vanished. Then he saw it. A shadow. Not moving. Just sitting. At the base of a pine tree, half covered in snow, legs pulled tight to her chest. Emily. Her cheeks were red, her lips pale, but her eyes, those deep, quiet eyes, met his without fear. He dropped to his knees in front of her. "What are you doing here, sweetheart?" She didn't answer right away. Then, after a breath, she lifted a small, laminated card. It was faded. Edges frayed from years of handling. He knew it instantly. The memorial card from his wife's funeral. Emily must have found it tucked in his old Bible. On the back, scrawled in his wife's handwriting, were the words, "Meet me here, under this tree. I'll come back when it's time." She had written it for him once, when he was deployed. He had buried that hope here, under this very pine tree, on the day she died. And now, his daughter had found it, had come to sit where love was once promised, because she had felt something he never said out loud, that he still waited. That part of him still hoped. He wrapped his arms around her, not hurried, not panicked, just full of quiet understanding. Her body trembled against his chest, but her voice was steady. "I knew you'd find me," she whispered. When they returned, the house stood frozen in breathless stillness. Lyra was waiting at the threshold, her shoulders straight, her arms tight across her chest, but her eyes betrayed her, wet at the corners, wild with fear she hadn't let herself name. Emily didn't look at her. She walked straight inside, head tucked against Harrison's shoulder. Only when she passed did Lyra notice what Emily had clutched in her small hand. The card. The one Lyra had seen once, long ago, when Harrison dropped his wallet in the kitchen. A promise buried. Now uncovered. No one spoke that night at dinner. The fire crackled. The soup cooled. But something had broken. Not something bad. Something necessary. Like a lock. Or a silence. Or the belief that pain had to stay hidden forever. At 9:14 p.m., the door to the Callahan estate creaked open with the groan of cold metal. The snow was still falling, heavy and silent like the closing of a curtain. Harrison Wade stepped into the foyer, drenched to the bone, his boots squished on the marble, coat hanging in icicles. His arms cradled Emily tightly against his chest, her eyes closed, but her breathing steady. Lyra was already there. She rushed down the staircase barefoot, robe loose, the image of control nowhere to be found. The moment she saw Emily safe in his arms, her breath caught. Her hands trembled as she reached for her, then paused, hesitant, as if unsure she still had the right to hold her own child. Harrison gently handed Emily over without a word. "She's okay," he said quietly, voice hoarse from the cold. "She just needed to feel remembered." Lyra clutched her daughter to her chest, sinking to her knees on the steps, as if her body could no longer bear the weight of everything she'd been holding inside. Emily stirred briefly, then curled into her mother, letting out a small sigh. And then, without warning, Lyra wept. Not silently, not politely, but with the grief of someone who'd forgotten how to cry. The tears didn't fall for just one night. They fell for years of buried pain, for every sleepless night, every distant hug, every carefully folded wall she'd built to stay intact. Harrison stood frozen. He looked like he wanted to speak, but instead he turned, picked up his mop, and silently began drying the puddle forming beneath his boots. But Lyra's voice stopped him. "She would have been 10 this year," she said. He turned slightly. "I'm sorry?" "My daughter," she whispered. Her name was Claire. She was born still. And after that, I stopped believing anyone could stay. Harrison didn't move, but the mop handle tightened in his grip. I tried to be strong for the others. I turned everything into a plan, a structure, a rule. I thought if I kept things clean, they wouldn't break again. She swallowed hard. But they broke anyway, just slower, quieter. He stood still, letting the moment hang. Then, in a low voice, he said, "That's what people forget about children. They don't crack with noise. They just fade." Lyra looked up at him, eyes red but focused. "Is that what happened to your daughter?" He nodded, slow. "Emily didn't stop speaking because someone hurt her. She stopped because I did. I lost my temper once, with a stranger. Just one punch. But she saw it, and she didn't look at me the same again." Silence, thick and heavy. "I wasn't hired to save anyone," Harrison added, picking up his bucket. "I was hired to mop floors, take out the trash, and keep quiet." "Then why did you go into the woods?" she asked. He met her eyes. "Because no child should ever wonder if they matter enough to be found." And with that, he turned and walked toward the servants' quarters. The house was still as he passed through the hall. No clattering toys, no whisper of mischief. But as he reached his door, something caught his eye. Taped right in the center was a piece of notebook paper. Sloppy, taped corner to corner with what looked like medical tape. 3 drawings, hand-sketched in marker. The first, a mop with sparkles all around it. The second, 5 stick figures holding hands. Ava, Dylan, Emily, Harrison, and a tall figure with long hair labeled Mom. The third, a heart. Below them, in shaky, oversized print, "Please don't go." His hand froze on the doorknob. Inside the room, nothing had changed. A single cot, a duffel bag, his boots drying on a heater. Yet something inside him had shifted, and he couldn't explain it. He sat down slowly, staring at the drawing. In the dim light, he could barely make out Emily's signature, a tiny yellow sun above the heart. She'd never written to him before, never drawn him before, never spoken of staying before. For a man who believed he was just passing through people's lives, it felt like someone had nailed a piece of his soul to a wall and asked it to stay. Later that night, Lyra stood alone in the hallway, holding a cup of untouched coffee. She stared at the drawing on Harrison's door, her expression unreadable, tired, soft. She didn't knock, but she didn't take it down either. And when she returned to her room, she passed the kitchen where the fridge still held Dylan's picture of the 5 of them. She had tried to remove it once. Now, she quietly adjusted the tape so it wouldn't fall. She didn't notice that Emily, awake in her bed, had seen it all. At exactly 7:02 a.m., Harrison Wade returned. The snow had melted into slush, but the morning air still held the bite of winter. He walked slowly up the curved stone path, duffel bag slung over one shoulder, the worn soles of his boots squeaking softly against the wet marble steps of the Callahan estate. For the first time since he arrived, he didn't hesitate. The front door opened before he could knock. Lyra stood there, dressed not in her usual blazer or heels, but in jeans, a soft gray sweater, and no makeup. Just her. Real, raw, and for once, unguarded. She didn't say hello, didn't say thank you. Instead, she held something out to him in her hand, a single silver key. Attached to a keyring was a tiny rectangular tag, etched in elegant cursive. "Welcome home." Harrison stared at it for a long time, as if holding something he'd long believed he didn't deserve. He looked up, but Lyra's gaze didn't waver. "I don't give those out easily," she said quietly. "But this isn't just about cleaning floors anymore, is it?" He opened his mouth, maybe to decline, maybe to deflect. But then a small voice broke the silence. "Slime attack in 5, 4, 3. Too late. From behind the living room sofa, Ava leaped forward, wearing a handmade paper crown and wielding a plastic spoon dipped in green goop. Dylan followed with glitter in one hand and a cookie in the other. Emily stood shyly in the hallway, holding a folder labeled Dad No. 2 Contract. Harrison blinked. "What is happening?" Ava saluted dramatically. "Operation Official Family Initiation, sir." Dylan held up the cookie like it was a Medal of Honor. "Step 1, sugar diplomacy." "And step 2, Ava grinned, slapping a post-it note on Harrison's chest that read, Dad No. 2, in bright pink marker, is labeling. Emily giggled softly, a sound so light it might have been mistaken for the breeze. But it was there. It was laughter. Harrison raised both hands in surrender. I wasn't briefed on any of this. You didn't need to be, Ava declared. You passed the test. What test? All of them. Lyra stood to the side, arms crossed, watching, but not interfering. Her lips twitched at the corners, fighting a smile. Emily walked over, slowly, then opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper, with large crayon drawings, and 3 stick figures holding a 4th one's hand. At the bottom, it read in red letters, Dad, by heart. Ava translated helpfully. It means you're not our dad by law, but you're our dad by choice. Harrison knelt down. His eyes flicked over the page. It was childish and messy, with cookie crumbs smeared in the corner, but it was the most serious document he'd ever been handed. They want you to sign it, Lyra said, her voice quieter than before. And if I don't? Harrison asked, looking up at her. Ava grinned. We have glitter, and no shame. Dylan nodded solemnly. And I told Grandma already. Wait, you told? Over FaceTime. She said, finally. Lyra sighed, half laughing, half shocked. You did what? She also wants to meet the janitor who made Ava eat broccoli, Dylan added. Everyone turned to Harrison. He raised his hands again. That was not part of the deal. Emily gently tugged his sleeve. He looked down, and she offered him a crayon. Purple. Her favorite. Harrison took it. He held the crayon like it was something sacred, and slowly, carefully, signed right under the drawing. The kids erupted. Dylan tried to toss glitter, but it stuck to his fingers. Ava shoved an extra cookie into Harrison's hand. Emily stood beside him, her shoulder touching his, eyes soft and glowing. Lyra didn't cheer. She just stood there, watching. Something shifted in her face. The way her eyes followed the moment, the way she looked at him, as if the war inside her had finally stopped fighting, as if the soldier in front of her hadn't just mopped the floors, but patched something far deeper. Later that morning, as Harrison helped clean up slime trails and half-eaten cookies, he caught his reflection in the hallway mirror. Same man, same tired eyes, but lighter. He touched the Dad No. 2 sticker still stuck to his chest. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost living on borrowed time. He felt present, alive, home. And when Emily slipped her hand into his, just before lunch, without a word, just presence, he knew. He wasn't afraid of the past anymore, because somehow, impossibly, this strange, broken house full of glitter bombs and silence had found a way to glue him back together. One crayon signature at a time, the morning sunlight filtered softly through the tall windows of the Callahan estate. It was Saturday. Quiet. Unhurried. Even the air felt different. Lighter, somehow, as though the house itself had exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. Harrison was wiping down the kitchen counters, not because it was his job anymore, but because he liked the smell of fresh lemon and the rhythm of a clean surface. Lyra entered, barefoot, cradling a mug of black coffee. You know, she said, her voice almost playful. You're technically off the clock. Harrison didn't turn. Old habits. She leaned against the counter, studying him. Or maybe something else. He finally looked at her, those steady gray eyes meeting hers. There was no armor left between them. She set her coffee down, took a breath, and then said it. I knew who you were the day you walked in. He blinked, quiet. She continued. I pulled your military file. The moment I saw Emily's name on the emergency contact form, I knew. Wade, Harrison J. Navy Cross, discharged honorably. 2 counts of unprovoked assault during deployment. 1 against a superior. Her voice didn't carry judgment, just facts. Truth. Harrison stared at her for a long time. So why'd you let me in? Lyra looked away for a moment, then back at him. because I needed to see if a man who once broke another man's jaw for touching his injured squad mate could learn to use those same hands to hold something fragile without crushing it. Silence settled over the kitchen like a warm mist. "I thought you'd throw me out," he said quietly. "I almost did," she admitted. "Twice. Maybe 3 times. And?" She smiled faintly. "Ava wouldn't let me." He raised a brow. "Ava?" Lyra turned, walked over to the fridge, and pulled something from the top. A folded piece of construction paper, clearly well handled, the edges frayed and the crayon colors a little faded. "She drew this 6 months ago," Lyra said, "after the last nanny quit." She handed it to him. He opened the paper slowly. Inside, a crude drawing, a tall man with a mop in one hand and 3 kids holding the other. Next to him, a woman in a big dress, all in purple. Above their heads, hearts and stars. And at the bottom, in Ava's unmistakable handwriting, "Mommy should marry the man who makes up stories while cleaning." Harrison chuckled, then grew quiet. "I didn't think she still believed in that stuff." "She didn't," Lyra said softly. "Until you." There was something in her voice, like a door that hadn't opened in years. Cracking. "What do you believe in?" he asked her. She hesitated, then shrugged. "I believe in what's right in front of me." "And what's that?" Lyra looked him in the eye. "You." That afternoon, the estate erupted into chaos, glittery, sugar-fueled chaos. Ava had called it the wedding we never had. But it wasn't a wedding, not really. Just a living room strewn with pillows and string lights, stuffed animals as guests, and a Spotify playlist that somehow played both Beethoven and Taylor Swift. Dylan wore a towel as a cape, Emily held a bouquet of dandelions, and Ava, of course, officiated. "Okay," she said, clearing her throat and standing on a step stool. "This is the ceremony of official, maybe love. No kissing. Gross. But you do have to accept the candy rings." Harrison stood awkwardly in a white dress shirt, the only one he owned, with the "Dad Number 2" post-it still stuck on his chest from yesterday. Lyra wore her usual slacks and blouse, but she had a daisy tucked behind one ear. Dylan had insisted. Emily stepped forward first. In her small hands, she held 2 lollipops shaped like rings. Cherry red. She gave one to Harrison, the other to Lyra, then stepped back. Ava cleared her throat again. "Harrison, do you promise to keep telling stories, cleaning up our slime, and not running away even when Emily gets stuck in trees?" "I do," he said solemnly. "Mom, do you promise to stop yelling so much and try smiling even when you're on the phone with scary lawyer people?" Lyra bit her lip, stifling a laugh. "I do." "Then I now pronounce you, officially, part of our chaos. You may high-five the bride." Harrison looked at Lyra. She looked at him. And for a moment, a full, long, still moment, the world felt whole again. He raised his hand. She met it with hers. The kids cheered like it was the 4th of July. Later, as the room quieted and the candy rings were half-eaten and the stuffed animals all fell asleep, Harrison sat on the floor with his back against the sofa. Lyra sat beside him, legs crossed, eyes half-lidded. "Did we just fake marry each other?" he asked. "Seems like it," she replied. "Should I be worried?" "Only if you're afraid of joy." He turned to her, his voice quiet. "I was. For a long time." She nodded slowly. "Me too." Emily, already dozing off, mumbled something. Neither caught the words, but they didn't need to, because whatever it was, she said it from the middle of them both, exactly where she belonged, exactly where they all did. The sky over the Callahan estate had turned a tender shade of spring blue, the kind that only came after winter had finally let go. The garden was alive again, not in a grand, curated way, but in the gentle chaos of childhood. Sidewalk chalk on the patio, mismatched pinwheels spinning on the lawn, and laughter echoing from tree to tree. It had been 6 months. 6 quiet, healing, impossible months. And somehow, no one had noticed the exact moment when the house stopped feeling like a museum and began feeling like home. Harrison stood at the kitchen counter, sipping coffee from a chipped mug that had somehow survived 3 glitter tornadoes, 2 slime avalanches, and a crayon revolt in the pantry. Emily entered, barefoot, clutching a sheet of paper behind her back. He looked at her with that familiar raised brow. She just smiled and handed it over. It was a drawing. Harrison held it up. 5 figures stood in front of a tall house with too many windows and just the right amount of whimsy. Emily, Dylan, Ava, Lyra, and him. Above them, in big, uneven letters, it read, "The castle that we laughed in." His throat tightened. "Did you draw this?" he asked softly. Emily nodded, then tilted her head, waiting for his reaction. But Harrison said nothing. He just walked over to the fridge, pulled off a faded magnet shaped like a pizza slice, and placed the new drawing beside the one Ava had made months ago, the one with the candy ring wedding and the stick figure family. Lyra entered just then, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up from kneading dough in the kitchen. She paused when she saw the new picture. For a moment, she just stared. Then she walked over, and without a word, pressed a clear piece of tape across the top of the paper, sealing it in place like something sacred. "Looks like we're running out of fridge space," she murmured. Harrison smiled. Good problem to have. That evening, as the sun melted into golden streaks across the horizon, Harrison and Emily walked hand in hand through the garden. Ava and Dylan were busy burying a time capsule behind the swing set, arguing about what counted as historically important. Lyra sat on the porch, reading a story aloud, though the kids were too distracted to listen and she was too amused to care. Harrison led Emily past the garden path, toward a spot few others visited. There, between the rose bushes and the old oak fence, stood a pine tree, tall, weathered, and noble in its silence. It had changed very little over the years, except now there was something hanging from one of its branches, a wind chime, handmade, a little crooked, bits of glass, old silverware, and seashells, tied together with fishing line and hope. It danced gently in the breeze. "Why did we put it here again?" Emily asked, her voice soft, still quieter than most, but steady now, with its own kind of strength. Harrison knelt beside her. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Because this is where I found you." She looked up at him. "And because your mom and I used to sit under a tree just like this. When she was scared, she'd say she wanted to believe that love could find its way, like the sound of a wind chime. No matter where you were or how lost you felt, the right person would hear it." Emily's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She just listened, the way she always had. Harrison touched the chime, setting it gently into motion. It sang a quiet song, not loud, not insistent, just present. "If you ever feel alone," he said, "and you hear this sound, it means someone is thinking of you, someone who loves you with everything they have." Emily took a step closer. Then, barely louder than the wind itself, she whispered, "I love you too, Dad." Harrison froze, not because she spoke. She'd been doing that for weeks now, but because this was the first time she'd called him that. He looked at her, eyes stinging, heart full in a way that no war or medal or job could ever touch. Then, without saying a word, he picked her up, the way only a father can, and held her against his chest. The wind chime above them swayed gently, catching the last rays of the sun. Inside the house, Lyra watched from the window. She didn't wave, didn't call out. She just smiled, pressing her fingers lightly to her lips, as though holding something sacred there, and turned back toward the kitchen. There was dinner to make, dishes to wash, laughter waiting in the next room. But first, she opened the fridge and stared at the 2 drawings side by side. One from a time when love was a wish, the other from now, when love had become a fact. She touched both papers, just briefly. And for the first time in a long, long while, Lyra Callahan laughed, not the polite kind, not the business lunch kind, but the real kind, the kind that starts deep in your ribs and makes you feel human again. Outside, the wind picked up slightly. The chime swayed once more. And if you listened very carefully, you might have heard it sing, a song of second chances, of broken things made whole, of a castle not built with bricks or gold, but with laughter and love, and the sound of wind in a pine tree at dusk. Fade out. Wind chime. Hope remains. We'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from? Leave us a comment. It's always a joy to see how far these stories reach and how many hearts they quietly touch. If this story made you smile or reminded you that goodness still exists in the world, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep telling more stories like this. Stories about healing, hope, and the quiet power of love. Thank you for watching. We're grateful to have shared this moment with you. Until next time, stay kind and take good care.